The following is a casual discussion I had about fighting in stories with Dr. David Perlmutter. This is one of our favorite subjects. If you didn't know, in addition to being a book editor, I am, or was, a competitive fencer, and am still a huge lover of martial arts movies. And Dr. Perlmutter, who is a professor of media and communication at Texas Tech University, and who has appeared on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, authored the book Visions of War, which is an exploration of man's long history of visually depicting human conflict from the Stone Age to the Cyber Age. We originally had a very rough plan to talk about 3 subjects: duels, brawls, and battles. But for the most part, we just gush about fighting in movies. Maybe we'll get more organized with the next one. I hope you enjoy. I do want to talk about the mechanics of a fight in a story. Within, or not mechanics, a fight within the context of a story, because I do feel there's a heavy reliance on good choreography and action. And as somebody I'm very good at picking out choreography and saying that doesn't look real, that's not realistic, this is fake, but I will still love it, even if it looks terrible, if the emotional context is good enough. And that's something that it's a very powerful tool that could be used for folks who don't have access to great choreography or the ability to film a story well, or a fight scene well. So I do want to discuss that as well. And we've separated it into 3 categories: the duel, which is one-on-one; the brawl, one versus many; and the battle. We could say war, but that's an entirely different subject because war would encompass long-term strategy, and it's more about the action itself. So Dr. Perlmutter, what have you got? Have you got some ideas you wanted to bring to the table discussing the duel specifically? Are we going to talk about mainly sword fighting, as that is my expertise, but we can totally put in some martial arts and fist fights and whatever it is that you'd be interested in exploring?
Sure. Well, my context here is I've always been interested in warfare and all of its large and small aspects. And one of the books I wrote probably about 25 years ago was called Visions of War. It's out of print, so I'm not plugging my book or anything, but it's called Visions of War from St. Martin's. And it was an attempt to do a history of the visualization of warfare from the earliest pictures we have, which I'll talk about in just a second, through at that time was the Bosnia War and sort of late 1990s video game fights, which were pretty good still. I mean, Obviously there's been some quality improvement there. And what I was trying to do was identify across cultures and even time certain repetitive tropes, motifs, themes, right?
Okay.
And so I went back to the earliest. I mean, there's always an argument: what's the earliest anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
But because we're always finding something new under the ground that pushes back the date of something, right? So in the Neolithic, we know people started fighting probably as long as there were like anatomically modern humans, and probably Homo erectus fought each other. But in the Neolithic, we have some of the first exact images of bands of humans fighting other humans or individual humans in a warrior duel, is what I'd like to call it, between 2 humans. And if you think about some of our earliest literature, which was oral first, the Iliad and the Odyssey, the fixation there is on the individual duel. In the Iliad, for example, there are armies described, but when a battle has to be decided, it's Brad Pitt versus another lead actor. I mean, it really is focusing on an individual hero versus hero combat.
Didn't we just recently have a movie with Timothée Chalamet called The King, where that's essentially where it came down to?
Yes.
I don't remember much of that movie because I only watched it through once, and I'm not a big Timothée Chalamet fan, so I just kind of watched it. But I remember liking that because I know that this is something that has happened in history, and so go ahead. Sorry,
and well, so what we find across cultures for thousands of years, while we do have pictures that show armies, like we have from one of the earliest recorded battles, the Battle of Kadesh, between the Egyptians and the Hittites, and you see armies full of hundreds of thousands, chariots and spearmen and so on. But the focus is the Pharaoh, who is literally like 80 feet tall compared to, literally like carved in stone as being this giant out of a fantasy, fighting, and all his men are little pygmies who they showed up too, but it was the Pharaoh who won the battle. Now, again, just for a moment, we think about what is the origin of that, because we didn't always have. Sorry.
I was going to say I have a theory. I don't want to interrupt.
Yeah. And I'm gonna. I promise I'll wrap up my lecture.
No, you're good. You're
10
good.
seconds. But just in the earliest battles that I saw when I looked this up on the Neolithic cave paintings, this is before civilization. Before we would call civilization with like cities and tablet. One of the things we don't know anything because we don't have any writing from then. But we see groups of humans, spears, some lances, arrows, fighting each other. Quite often, you can see one person is physically larger, like painted larger than the others, may have a different headdress, and is in the front, is in the lead, is taking what we call leadership, right? Now, today, leadership is often behind the scenes, right? No American general is supposed to go
be on the field.
I mean, that's no longer, but for most of human history until a certain, you could say until the modern era, but in ancient times too, most of the time, leadership was from the front. And there's so many famous instances of, there was a battle famously where Julius Caesar, he's a commander, he's got 40,000 troops, but there was the Battle of Alesia, his most famous battle, where he was besieging a Gaulish town, and then another Gaulish army came to besiege him. So it was a double envelopment, a donut, if you imagine. And at the crucial point of the battle, now we only have history. We have history, Caesar's history, who tells us this, but I don't think he was lying, or his enemies would have said he was lying. He personally rides up with his red cloak, scarlet cloak, flying, and leads his men, giving them courage, and personally wins the battle. There's 200,000 people there, but we're told that Caesar personally, his intervention won the battle. So from the very beginning, there's been an emphasis in literature, an emphasis in history, and an emphasis visually that the duel between the two principles, the two kings, the two champions we got from the Bible, with David versus Goliath, right? Mm-hmm. It decides the battle.
Right.
So we have in many different traditions this idea of the all-important duel. And really, Hollywood movies have picked up on this. And the one-on-one duel, typically between the hero and the villain, is just the centerpiece of so much Hollywood storytelling. But also, you think about how much fantasy storytelling. At some point, there's been a crucial duel.
Yes. And as far as storytelling is concerned, there's a reason for that. I think within historical context, the reason, for instance, the example you gave with the pharaoh being depicted as this giant, massive figure with the little pawns of the soldiers being the army. I mean, I highly doubt there was a massive difference in their physical stature, but it was an individual versus another individual, or a grand army of, the evil unseen. Because that comes from, I believe, a more dating back to like the Neolithic era, the idea of our protector requires leadership. If there's no leadership in security, like of the tribe, I did a lot of research of the Jomon and the Yayoi periods in Neolithic Japan, and there was a warrior leader, and then there was a religious leader in almost all the cultures, or all the groups in Japan. There were multiple, I say cultures and groups because they weren't really the same people. But they had that same structure, that there was a leader of military and a leader or of security. And then there was a leader, a spiritual leader. And I think that it stems from that the people look to the protector. And so even when it's, many, many years later where you've got the Egyptians and the Pharaoh, or later, like you were saying, you didn't bring up the American Revolutionary War, but there's always these depictions of, George Washington, like it's his army. We have that in mind because that's technically what it is you've got one person or the leadership coordinating the masses so that there's a unified, coordinated effort to protect something or conquer something. And it has to operate this way. Otherwise, it's just chaos. It's just it really would be whoever has the greatest amount of technology or the greater numbers would always win the battle. But in the end, if you've got a wise and cunning general or chief, you're going to be able to protect your people or conquer those people. And so that's, I think, why we bring it down to, it's one person versus another. Now, within storytelling, this happens because we don't sympathize with something technical like we do something personal. So the Lord of the Rings is always a great example to give up because everybody's seen it. On the big battlefield, like let's say, what do you call it? Battle of Helm's Deep. Everybody loves that. We have these big epic moments of catapults, and they blow up the wall, and then they retreat to the inner keep, and you've got archers and all kinds of crazy stuff going on here. But the most interesting parts of that battle were with individuals, where you saw specific individuals and what they were doing. Anytime Legolas and Gimli were working together to defend each other and also, take out orcs and then whatnot. And then you've got Aragorn and his struggle of like, do I step up as the leader here when the king is right here? And, he ends up basically kind of convincing the king, you need to, like, let's just go out in a blaze of glory, because like, what else are we going to do? We've sent the women off, and then in the final battle, it's even more so with the individual. You've got Aragorn and the rest of the Fellowship on the battlefield at the front gate, where they're battling the mouth of Sauron and stuff and all the orcs. But then when you get to Mount Doom, it's Frodo, the battle happening inside his heart. Can he let go of the ring? Like, that's the real battle. People will resonate more with that than they will with a big epic battle, because it's something that they've experienced themselves, but also there's an emotional response. If you've got, okay, there's 10 people on this side and we like all of them, but you never zoom in on them and their personal battle in this, or their personal fight within this battle, it doesn't mean much to people. You have to get in there and be with them. Éowyn is the third movie where she takes out the Witch King. It's one of the most epic moments, because we saw her struggle to, be one of the protectors of her people. And then there she is defending her uncle. And then she's the one who takes out the Witch King. So it's about giving.
Let me, if I could just interrupt one moment, just to go back for a second to something you
sure.
said. Yeah, because I just want to. You've said 7 great things. I want.
Oh, sorry.
I just want. This duality that must be. You gave the great example of there's a battle going on when the decision is made. Let's go to Mordor. Right, Aragorn leads the army to Mordor, and of course they're always outnumbered. They're about to be beaten, but then that is not settled by Aragorn having a personal duel with Sauron, right?
Thank goodness Peter Jackson wanted that to happen, and they cut it out. I'm not joking.
Although, of course, it happened in the first battle, right? Where we're shown the prologue, where Isildur comes out, and there is a one-on-one battle.
Right.
Sauron loses that one.
But how many people feel emotional resonance with that prologue? We don't know those characters or what their struggle is. It only means something when you know what they were going through. Yeah.
But just on that point, you pointed out that the battle is settled by the duality within the decision to throw the ring into there. I like it, and I think the greatest literature balances the need for heroic combat, the kind of thing you see in the Neolithic art, where there's one, and you read about in the Iliad, where there's Hector versus Achilles, with what's going on with Centurion Jimmy and Centurion Bobby. And I want to give two examples of that. One is Henry V, the Shakespeare play, which has been made into a number of great movies, is that, yeah, and then Timothy Chalamet, you have the focus, you have to have the focus on the king, right? Like the king is the center. The king dies, the army morale breaks. I mean, the king is important, even if he's not a particularly good fighter. Their presence is important on the battlefield, and yeah, a duel is important. But in Henry V, we also go to the campfire and see a couple of ordinary soldiers chewing on their mutton, having some ale before the battle, and hear from them, their point of view. And then, of course, Henry shows up and talks to them and shows his greatness as a leader, that he can speak to the ordinary men as much as he can to the princes. And this is also done really well. There's an old television series with Glenda Jackson, Elizabeth R. It's one of those old BBC series, great costume productions, great actors and actresses. And she plays Elizabeth I. And the Spanish Armada is coming, and the army mobilizes. And Elizabeth goes and gives this fantastic speech, which is historical, that I have the body of a woman, but the heart of a lion and a warrior, right, to the army, and gets the army all pumped up and the Navy for the battle that's coming. Again, in the show, this whole BBC production, they keep cutting back to these two sort of semi-comic ordinary soldiers who are saying, "Oh, all right, the queen's going. I can't quite hear her, but she's giving a really good speech." I mean, just that the duality of the ordinary person who's caught up in the army and the leaders who are caught up in the duel, I think always is something that fills out in literature and in history. And history wants to give us that example, and literature wants to give us that example. The best battles I've seen are the ones that try to cover both bases there.
Yeah, I think I mean, obviously you have to have, if it's a battle, everybody needs to know what was happening on the grand scale. But I don't think that any story that never zooms in and gives a personal account of what was going on, I don't think that you can have a story like that take place where it means anything to anybody. I mean, how many times when you were in middle school and high school were you reading about, the 100-Year War or whatever, and it meant almost nothing to you because it was just the troops advanced into the valley and then these other guys came along from the flank and took them out, and then it worked out for them because they were using, I don't know, diseased spears or something. Sometimes a tactic can be interesting, but people in stories, when it comes to storytelling, people remember how they feel about a story more than they remember the technical things that happen. They don't tend to it doesn't stick with them unless it makes them feel something. And you just can't feel something for a chess game. I'm sorry. If you got two robots playing each other, you don't feel much.
I'm going to slightly diverge. I don't think it's a disagreement, but it's a diverge. So I read a lot of military science fiction, which is pretty heavy on the technology and the course of the battle, but certainly interjects the personal story. But you might get 3 pages on what kind of guns they used and like the tactics there. And like an author like David Drake, he came out with the Hammer Slammer series, sold 600,000 copies. Military science fiction in the future. There is an audience for the details of the battle. I mean, that joke about like every man thinks about the Roman Empire once. I think every man thinks about the Battle of Stalingrad at least once a day. And maybe the
I don't disagree. I don't disagree that there is an audience.
I think there's a
for that.
balance there.
Yeah, no, there definitely is. But I think that when it comes to storytelling, it's something that's necessary, is to have a personal account of some kind,
Yes.
Something that people can resonate with emotionally, because what you're talking about is the technical aspect of science fiction that is appealing to people. Like I would find 3 pages on the differences between French, German, and Russian footwork in fencing, if it's in the middle of a story. But I guarantee you most people would not. But I have a personal interest that has nothing to do with storytelling. It's a technical interest. And science fiction does do this for people who are interested in the science fiction of it. Just like in a fantasy, people would be interested in the fantasy elements. Again, going to Lord of the Rings, or actually, let me switch to another one, Harry Potter. Okay, all the different spells that they're using on each other. These are spells that, as a fantasy person, you would have seen being used throughout the series, and now you see them in a battle and you're going, oh man, I didn't think to use it that way. That's a technical interest in the element of that genre that I personally find appealing. But if you take a story that is just that stuff, no personal, no human story within it, it's not going to resonate with anybody else. It's going to have a very limited audience. But if you bring in that human element, which is where we get back to the leader versus the leader, or the leader versus the unfaced horde, I forget what the heck you call it. It's like, basically, there were two representations that I recall from just my studies was the of early battles, which was, it would be your leader and your army versus either another leader and their army, or a no leader group, which would be something like the Vikings or something. And not that they didn't have leaders, but that they would be seen as like this enemy that is just they're a bunch of barbarians, and they come to us and they trash our towns, and what is their purpose? They're raiding, and so you don't need a leader of there. You just need, the enemy is evil, and that's and our virtuous protector is going to take them out, or protect us from them, or whatever. So putting the human element in there is necessary for it to be a story. Otherwise, it's just technical details.
Yes, I think let's talk about the individual duel. So, in The Lord of the Rings, the books and the movie, probably one of the most famous good versus evil duels is Gandalf versus the Balrog at the bridge. Yes. And it's become a meme for all time.
The Balrog is a faceless evil, but Gandalf, we know.
Yeah, I mean, it depends who you're rooting for. I mean, you can go to Reddit, Sauron did nothing wrong, and you'll find people rooting. I mean, now, one of the things we've learned over the years is that there's always there are fanboys for anything. So
yes,
but yes, and right, and we don't. And this is something you've talked a lot about on your show, and we've talked about, is like we have sort of a backstory of Gandalf. I mean, actually, Gandalf, for a character, doesn't have that much of a backstory. He's a wizard, and he comes from somewhere, and he's got a mission. But he's obviously a super sympathetic character by that time, intentionally so, and I would hope most of the audience feels that way. The Balrog, there is a backstory if you've read the Silmarillion, which most people wouldn't have at that time, or at the time the movie came out. But I don't think
it existed when the book came out, did it? I'm pretty sure that they were after
yes,
he'd already.
Yeah. I that's what I meant.
I might be wrong.
He'd written it first, and you could, if you were his editor, or friend, if you were at Oxford, you'd have read some of it. But the point is, the Balrog is exactly what you say. There's no backstory. There's a little Balrog his mother didn't love him, and he was thrown out as an orphan. I mean, today in the remake, that's what's going to happen.
That's what would happen. Oh gosh,
yeah.
Yes,
there's going to be a Balrog origin story, and you'll learn that the Balrog was just misunderstood. Gandalf was the true, the true evil. But no, seriously, that is a perfect example of one type that you've just described. Is that the almost nameless evil that the good confronts.
Yeah.
As opposed to a more, and this is not a knock on Tolkien, it's what he chose, and it made sense. You have in many cases famous, let's talk about your world of fencing. In my memory, the greatest fencing duel in the history of fencing duels in movies was from Zorro, between Basil Rathbone and Tyrone Power.
How did you know? That is the best one. It is the best one. Do you know why?
Because I am twice your age, young lady, and of course I know this.
No, because
this was in 1960. It was considered to be the best duel in movie history.
Before we sat down and you said we should talk about sword duels, like from old movies and new movies, that is the one that sticks in my head. And the reason why is because you have two actual fencing maestros. Well, they're not maestros, but they were very good fencers. And they sort of blocked out what they're going to do, but they fenced it was a mostly choreographed fight that was like, we want this to feel real. And the kill shot is gorgeous. It is so good. I'm sorry. I'm going to gush over that fight scene. I love it. I can't tell you how many times I've watched it. I have used that clip to teach people about good choreography and fencing.
And by the way, you just said something really important. If you are writing a movie script or you're writing a book, something people never talk about: blocking. Mm-hmm. If you're involved in acting or fencing, you know what blocking is, where people belong as opposed to each other on a stage or a screen. And you have to work that out, because you can't have your actors slamming into each other, well, unless you want that to. So fight scenes, as you know, because you've spent your life doing fight scenes as a
fighting real
fencer.
Fights, not actual fight scenes, but I have taught theatrical fencing. And I've always brought in that your duels on stage and on screen, obviously. Yeah. I've always taught that they're only going to be as good as the story that surrounds them. Because if you have I could show that duel. I mean, I could show it to a fencer and they'd be like, damn, that was good. But if I showed it to anybody else, they'd be like, who cares? I don't care who these two guys are. I don't care what they're doing. You probably have difficulty even seeing what their blades are doing. But it only matters if it only has emotional context based on what comes before it and what the consequences are going to be, depending on who wins or how this duel turns out. So, okay, I'm sorry, I cut you off. You brought it up.
No, that I agree. I guess
you brought up blocking.
Maybe it's my gender speaking here, but I do like fight scenes.
I do too.
I mean, integrated into a great story, absolutely. But I'm okay watching things blowing up or people fighting without a story, just to appreciate a great fight scene, right? So, like, I'm not a huge fan of, say, John Wick movies, but I've never seen a John Wick. I'm not. It's not my genre.
Either, and I know I should. I know they got great fight scenes.
But like, I've seen the clips of the first 7 of them, or whatever, 3. The fight scenes are really well done. They're really well choreographed. I like when he's going one way and the stunt actor is going another way. I appreciate the talent behind it.
Okay. So I guess I want to get into what you're talking about here, which is having just a generally good fight scene. So let's forget the story and everything else. I mean, the way that you integrate a story into a fight scene is, with the stakes and then the style of what, like let's say you've got somebody who's injured, they got to fight a different way than the person who's not injured, obviously. Skill level needs to show something. It's got to feel brutal if it has to feel brutal, but just the choreography and the blocking of a fight scene. For me personally, I don't feel like it takes all that much to have a decent duel. I think a lot of people bite off more than they can chew, and you get actors who look like they're doing choreography instead of fighting for their lives. The best sword fights that I have seen on film in like the last 10 years are the Kenshin movies. I don't know if you've heard of them. I don't know if they're Netflix movies, but the Rurouni Kenshin. It's a samurai assassin, and they have very long cuts, like 20 seconds of like fighting for your life, brutal samurai sword fights that I can barely keep up with. And my eye is much faster than a katana blade, just because a fencing blade is much faster than a katana. A modern fencing blade is faster. And I'm going, these look like people actually fighting for their lives, and like they could die if they get hit. And they're very physical. They're doing all their own stunts. The camera was obviously trained on their faces and following them in rehearsals, because it's always in the right place, but it's not cutting. And I'm like, I appreciate that so much, because somebody said, let's have fights where people actually look like they're fighting for their lives and show that the actors are actually. I appreciate that so much. It adds such a high quality to the fights in general. And then I haven't seen all of the Kenshin movies. I've seen one of them several times just because I liked the story, but I've watched all the fight scenes because I thought that they were brilliant. But that's also for me, I watch them because I like the technicality of them. I like that they're brutal. I like that they're so fast I can barely keep up with them, and they haven't been sped up. And I'm like, I appreciate the effort that went into these fight scenes so much, but I don't think I could show that to somebody and it means anything to them unless they're like me and they just have an obsession with good sword fights.
Well, let's take one of the words that you said, which I think was a key word for discussing fight scenes, and brutality. So I go to Robert Howard and his Conan stories, which were fabulously successful right away. I mean, people forget that like Howard was like, he was a young man, and from the very first Conan stories in Weird Tales or something like that, they would be like the most popular stories instantly.
I remember the book covers, the Franco Zeffirelli covers.
That's right. That's right. They're still huge now. I mean, I think one was just sold for $2 million or something.
Not surprised. It's gorgeous work. Anyway, sorry, keep going.
Yeah. So Conan is described in the original stories. A fellow Texan just wrote a new biography of Robert E. Howard. As you know, he had sort of a tragic, short life, very productive, but short. And in the Conan stories, and this is why I think Franzetti, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Franzetti, his art is so perfectly representative of the stories. Conan is described as a fury. That he does not.
Frank Frazetta. Sorry, that was
Frank
the name.
Frazetta. Yeah,
I knew I got the name wrong. I was like, I think I'm getting it wrong too. Frank Frazetta. Go ahead.
Yeah. Anyway, he's described specifically as having a fighting style where he comes at you with immense brutality and just fists of fury. Just anything he can do. He's slashing. He's biting. He's kicking. And in the stories, it's very well described as he's fighting often people who are at his skill level or at his level of warriorship, but his emotion and just rage and power he puts into it overwhelms them. And he will fight and defeat plausibly bigger enemies, although that's hard to imagine sometimes, but also many more enemies because of this furious brutality. So he's not a rapier,
He fights a bit like a juggernaut.
That's with a sword, or anything that comes to hand. And I think that's interesting as one type of fighter, right?
I've actually fenced people like that before.
Alpha.
In competition, have fenced people who they're 100% offense. And they're usually bigger, stronger, faster than you are. And so the goal it's different for every opponent, but for every juggernaut opponent, most of the time you got to be the one attacking. So I cannot let this person attack, because once they start moving, it's like you can't stop them. You have to put them on the defense. If it was a girl versus a guy, because we do have men versus women, then I was taught by my wonderful instructor who has passed. He said, if you're a girl and you have to fence a guy, you have to take it to the package right away. He's like, you need them to be afraid to come after you. So I was trained to hit men in the junk as hard as I could, as early as I could if I was in that situation, because it makes them reluctant to attack. They don't want to accidentally get caught in close combat again. But
could I ask, was it also part of this? Because if there's a mismatch of physicality, right? Like, I mean, when we've talked about this before, where, it's a challenge in films. Like you might have a star, Timothy Chalamet. Okay, Timothy Chalamet is not a heavily muscle-bound person. You can believe that he can parry and duel and jump around and get somebody. I don't think he would win a fist fight against Russian hitmen as
No,
much as,
but it's
but
all
he would
depending
have
on the
to use
fighting style.
tactics and
Yeah.
strategy. And I wanted to ask you, were you also advised to get them angry, to get them to make a mistake
No.
by provoking them?
But I fenced many people who were. I had a nickname on the strip. They called me they called me the Ice Woman because I did not get emotional at all. I had many
That's
teammates
great.
who would I know basically just like I didn't really care if I won or lost, which meant that if I was falling behind, it didn't affect how I fenced it, except that I could, look at what am I doing wrong? How can I get the next touch instead? But I fenced many people who were deliberately attempting to intimidate or cause fear. And I could see that they would be scary, but I just sit there going like, oh, well, if I get a bruise, so what? I mean, I've had bones broken in fencing and because people have hit me so hard. I've had my arm disabled for months because it was hit so hard at one point. But to me, it was I know it sounds
And
weird,
that's
but it's almost like
intimidating.
you go into a zone, like where you
I would
go,
be intimidated by that if I
it
were coming,
doesn't,
if I were attacking with all, I'm not powerful, but like if my ego was involved in like I can overwhelm this person, that somebody's not reacting, that they're keeping their ice coldness, that would be intimidating in its own. And
uh,
and it's showing
I
that in
think for some
fantasy, in
people,
literature,
yeah.
with or the screen, I think would be a great thing.
Yeah, it's so okay, what I wanted to get to about the causing fear or causing intimidation, what was the other thing you said is causing fear? You said something else. Anyway.
Provoking them,
Oh,
they
getting
make
them angry.
mistakes. Yeah.
I mean, people get angry at themselves more than anything. I always wanted the fight to be fair. Sometimes people would do things and like not defend. Anyway, we won't get into that stuff. I have lots of fun fencing stories, but um, to to attempt to cause fear in your opponent is, in my opinion, a show of a lack of confidence in your technical skill or in your own ability as a fighter. If you're trying to affect their emotions, then it just means that you don't think that you've got what it takes to beat them on a technical level or a physical level. You have to beat them you have to beat them emotionally, because that's emotion. That is not mental. Mental would be, I get you to think you know what I'm going to do next, but I don't do that thing. That is why fencing is considered physical chess, is because you're trying to manipulate your opponent into thinking you're going to do one thing, and then you don't do that thing. But then you also have to go, they know I'm trying to manipulate them. So what are they going to do knowing that I'm trying to manipulate them? And it's just a back and forth like that. But then it happens so fast, you can only plan ahead so far. Sometimes you try to get somebody to react in a certain way and then forget that they're reacting this way. And then you're like, okay, when I attack them in this spot, then that they're going to react in this one particular way. So I'm not going to attack that spot for a while. And then you go, okay, now's the time I'm going to attack it. And they're going to reflexively go there. And now I know what they're going to do. That's kind of how it plays out. But if you're talking about attempting to cause fear or attempting to, why do I know? Oh, to cause anger. That is emotional. And it to me, it's always a block to your ability to think through things if you get emotional about them. If you're suddenly breaking down because I don't know what I'm going to do, he's going to hit me and it's going to hurt. Like, well, why don't you hit them first? If your fear is that I'm going to get hit, you're usually going into the retreat mode already. I don't want to get hit, so I got to avoid being hit by their blade. Where the fastest way to win, and I fenced epee. I fenced all three weapons, but I fenced epee. That was my primary weapon, which means you touch first, you win. Doesn't matter how you get them. My instinct would be, if I don't want to get hit, I have to hit them first. I don't know how we got into the technicalities of this. I can go on this tangent forever. Maybe we should bring it back. But you were asking me about how I felt about causing intimidation and fear. Although technically it's not something that I personally believe to be like honorable or, that's good sportsmanship. I honestly don't care because it doesn't affect me. It's great for storytelling. It's fantastic. If you have a super scary opponent versus somebody who's less confident in themselves. What's interesting, I don't think I've ever seen, I'm trying to call to mind a fighter in stories that has been depicted as somebody who intentionally, he's the hero, or she, I guess, attempts to cause fear or anger in the opponent, and like that is seen as the good thing.
Well, I guess I'm saying it's a polarity, and so the Conan character, and I don't know. I honestly, Arnold Schwarzenegger did a good job, but one thing I don't think, because of everybody knew what a nice guy he was as an actor,
He wasn't brutal enough.
Yeah, he just didn't come off with that like barbarian rage enough. Although interestingly, I mean, just this is an aside, but like I saw a documentary about him as a bodybuilder, and that was his tactic. He tried to throw off the others with intimidation and like poking them and just trying to get them off their game with like wit, which you wouldn't necessarily think,
I don't
somebody
see,
of
the
his
thing
size.
is, I just feel like that's not really wit though. That's like, yes, you're trying to play psychological games with your opponent, but it just means that you don't think that you're so glorious that you can win just based off of your own form.
Well, if we're talking about
you have to make them make
approximation of like a fight,
mm-hmm.
For hundreds of years in Western culture, we actually had rules of dueling, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people did fight actual duels, and sometimes with guns and sometimes with swords, and they were rules about that. Like you were not supposed to do certain things, and you were supposed to do other things within the rule. Now, on a battlefield where the stakes are actual death, I'm sure there are many cases I can name them.
Oh, the rules are out of the window in the battlefield. That's different.
Well,
it's totally different.
They were still sort of practices. I mean, especially with the knights, right? About you'd still get these stories, especially in Western medieval Europe, of like, I knocked my opponent down, but I didn't want to win the battle dishonorably, so I let them up again. So I mean, there were some rules. Now, you could argue that industrial warfare threw those out, and you wouldn't like let your opponent pick up their gun again and start from
no. But we have the Geneva Convention.
Yes, in combat though, people are going to try to kill
in the
each
heat
other.
Of the battle. Yeah. So what are you saying here, that this is something that you feel like it's not realistic, but we see it portrayed in storytelling a lot?
Okay, so you're writing. I mean, let's talk about the challenge for a writer, right? And you give advice. You give great advice to authors who are presenting a narrative to you, and about like how to structure things and how to tell a story. And I know you also want to hear their voice. You're not rewriting them into something that they're not, but like there are things which work plausibly. And I do think it is interesting when you have either visual, like, actualized scenes, visual scenes of combat. And I want to give an example. The 1995 movie Rob Roy, starring Liam Neeson.
Good example.
Yeah, Liam Neeson is the title character. And it flips the convention. He's big, he's tough, and when he fights, it's with a big claymore sword, big, heavy sword. And in the final duel, it's a 1995 movie, so I'm going to give away a spoiler here. But he fights Tim Roth, a little guy who's using, I guess, an épée, a very thin.
Rapier.
Yeah. And so it's reversed. Like the little guy with the little sword is the bad guy. He's been shown throughout the movie to be a despicable human being. But he wins every fight because he gets in there and like kills even the big brutal guys by just dancing around them. He's very fast, and he's gets people under the armpits or something like that. So the big tough guy is the good guy, and the little speedy darting sniper is the bad guy. And in the fight, I won't give away the actual fight. People should watch this. It's interesting how they play off their two styles. And I think that makes interesting fiction when you can certainly have two people who have identical styles and play by the same rules,
Oh no,
but I
I
also
always
think it
prefer
makes
it
it
when it's
interesting.
two different fighting styles.
Yes.
That's always
Yeah.
visually that's more interesting. I pulled
Yes.
up the duel to watch it because I've seen this movie. I remember actually going, being my fancy snobby self. I was like, it's not that great. But no, but see, but it's the context of the fight that's interesting. Is you've got the big guy with the big sword, and he's the one fighting for our side, and then you've got this small guy who's fast and deadly like a viper, and so it's intimidating, but
Yeah.
only just that situation. Now I could go look up, and actually I've done this several times. Because I've had fencers as students who are very small, and it's hard for them to learn because they just get clobbered as a beginner fencer. When you're small, you get your butt handed to you every single time, and I have to tell them, like, it's not going to be like this forever. You are learning to fence Goliaths, but you're learning to fence harder and smarter and faster and better, and at some point you're going to figure it out, and they're not going to be able to do anything against you because you can change directions faster, you can move your blade faster. Like, you can do the Rob Roy thing, except the bad guy wins. um and I've pulled up fencing tournaments where that was the situation. I had a favorite one just a couple of years ago, where was this kid who's easily 2 feet shorter than the other person. 2 whole feet, that's pretty short. And just kicking their ass. And I was like, can you see how they're moving? They're staying out of distance. They're never stopping moving. They're constantly prodding, constantly poking, constantly making the other person second guess. And there is some mental stuff going on there, but it's not emotional, because I mean, how can this little guy scare a big guy except with his talent? His talent is so good. I'm afraid to make a
Yes.
mistake because they will take
It's
advantage of that
plausible.
mistake. Yes, it
That's
is
what the
plausible.
thing is. It's not one of
Yeah.
these things where
No, no, no.
somebody who's
It's totally
smaller is
real.
given these magical powers. But
No.
like it's plausible that this little guy trained his whole life to fight big guys by being faster. The viper is a fantastic term. It was a bull versus a viper.
Mm-hmm.
And vipers will usually win that one.
If you watch, I'm glancing at the duel on my other screen here
Yeah.
every once in a while. He is constantly going in and out of distance. So the shorter guy, and to be in distance means that you're close enough to engage with the other person. The blades are close enough to your physical bodies are close enough that you can touch blades, basically. Sounds weird. If you're out of distance, you can relax a little bit. So he is constantly going in and out. So this guy, the big guy, it takes a lot longer for him to react to a small guy coming in to his distance because he's bigger. You are slower when you are bigger. And if the other guy is never in distance, he's only going in and out quickly. There's not much that the bigger guy can do about that, except maybe constantly keep him on the run. But this guy's obviously very fast. So yeah, no, it's definitely possible. I find it very interesting to see on screen, especially because I love a good fight. I love an underdog, but I also like a subversion of the trope, or a subversion of what we usually see, which in this case was, now you have a small, fast, deadly, very highly skilled duelist versus a battlefield warrior who's not used to fighting this way, and it's not going to be as easy for him. And so it's a different animal too. Battle.
And that's the advice we're giving, right, to would-be fantasy epic writers is think about what is expected and try to play with it. Try something that feels fresher, that might be somewhat different. Historically, I was also thinking one other variation is where the duel never happens. And let me give you a famous historical example, which actually became a movie, which was a challenge to make it happen in the movie, because it sort of made sense in history, but like on a movie screen. So
everybody wanted, yeah.
Alexander, the Oliver Stone movie starring Colin Farrell. So from what we know from history, Alexander the Great, he wasn't great yet, but he led this Macedonian Greek army to fight the great empire of the time, the Persian Empire. And several times he shows up on the battlefield with what we're told is a relatively tiny Greek Macedonian army versus a massive Persian army. And each time he says, okay, we can't win this tactically or, like by maneuver. I'm going to go right for the king of Darius. I'm going to go right for him because the entire Persian army is built around the king. The only way we're going to defeat them, is, and it works historically. That happened twice. He rides with his companion cavalry, his heavy cavalry, right towards the king, and the king leaves. The king runs away, and the Persian army falls apart. Now, when I first heard that they were making a movie about Alexander, I happen to be partly of Greek descent, so I'm pro Alexander. I'm actually descended directly from him, but I don't like to talk about that. But
ooh, very cool.
Yeah,
should I start calling you Dr. the Great?
Yeah, after post-mortem. I don't like to do it during my lifetime, but later, Colin. So in the movie, there's a challenge there, right? Like, how do you actually show that, like physically, in the blocking of a movie? Well, I think actually the movie had some problems, but like the battle scene where it's built, this is where the subversion is, because it's building up to what most people don't know the history, right? Who went into that movie theater. So it's building up to, okay, I, Alexander, king of the Greeks and the Macedonians, are going to take on personally, in a personal duel, the king of the mighty Persian Empire. And then, boom, they run away. King of the mighty Persian Empire takes off on his chariot, and you don't see him there. And Alexander chases him across Asia.
It would be so difficult to portray that as anything other than comical. So there's a movie that I grew up with that I love called The War of the Buttons. I like the Irish version. There's a French version, and I like the Irish version. And there's two towns, the rich town and the poor town in Ireland, and the boys fight each other after school. Like, they have actual battles against each other in fields, and like it's cool because sometimes they're in historical locations, and they're having a battle there. And at one point, the poor kids realize we're outnumbered, and they've got better slingshots than we do. Like, we're going to get our butts handed to us. And what happens is the losing team, if you get captured, you get all of your buttons on your shirt cut off, and the poor kids can't afford that. So at one point, the rich kids show up for a battle, and all the poor kids jump out ready to attack them, but they're butt naked. And so they run after the rich kids, and the rich kids run off because they're like, what are we supposed to do? It's like a naked horde coming after us. It was fun, but it was comical because like that's the only way I mean, it's hard to make that into something climactic unless it's like you are wondering, is the king going to turn around and fight you? Is he going to actually stop and, hold his ground and come after you? But if you're trying to be historically accurate and he's just running, I would have possibly, I have not seen Alexander, which I can't believe I haven't seen it because I should have. If I was helping with that and they're like, well, we think we're just going to have him stop and fight, but we would love to be more historically accurate where he actually does just run off, I would have built up the question in Alexander's mind, what are we going to do with his generals or whatever? Like, he's there and he's got his main guys and they're going to turn on us, and like build up that like a fear of what do we do, and just be like, there's nothing that we can do. We have to beat him. This is the only way that we're going to do it. And so they do the Conan thing, and they're just going to charge their asses off right for him. And then you've got the king there, maybe holding on at first, like, we're going to fight him back. But then some of his generals, like, this isn't going to work. And then they all just take off. And like, there's a relief there. Like the charge itself is the climax, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you have to build that actually, Oliver Stone took your notes.
Good for him. He did a good job, Oliver.
Your time tachyon sent notes back in time, because by the time Alexander, Colin Farrell, has fought his way through the Persian cavalry, through the Persian ranks, through the guards of the king, he is bloody. He's screaming, he's furious, and it's a pretty good moment because the Persian king is not shown as a coward, but he is just so like, I can't believe this is happening, that somebody got like
This close.
a spear's throw. And actually, he throws a spear and just misses the king. Now, interestingly, talk about art. There's a very famous Alexander tapestry, which is a piece of a mosaic that was found, which shows that scene. But it shows the king wanting to fight Alexander. It's very hard to show in like one picture.
Yeah.
And his charioteer, the king's charioteer, terrified and like spurring the horses on. So the king wanted to stay to fight Alexander, but his charioteer said, "I'm getting out of here, master. Sorry, I can't stay around anymore." But
he
so our
threw
basic advice,
the charioteer after the bus. That's what he did. Like, you're the scapegoat. Hold me back.
His name was Vic, and he was just working that day. He was on the day shift, for the battle. But so we are telling people, think about the physics of the battle.
Mm-hmm.
Think about the blocking. Think about like what's plausible physically between your characters that you've described. Don't give characters powers they don't have. Make them the best fighters within what's plausible. We've talked before about like, just having 90-pound people throw Russian hitmen, 300-pound Russian hitmen across the screen doesn't work for us, right?
No.
Would you agree on that?
I would totally agree with that.
Yeah.
I remember Black Widow in the first Avengers movie, and she's like tied to a chair and they're like beating her, and have her talk on the phone. She's like, "Oh my gosh, like, no, I'm fine. They're telling me everything." And you realize through the entire interrogation, they were kind of revealing stuff to her. And I remember her fight. She's in like a cocktail dress and nylons, barefooted. And I remember like enjoying her fight. I like the idea of her being agile and using what she has against these guys. But anytime you're going to have like a small woman beating up physically a big guy, and it has nothing to do with her being smart and figuring out how to use what she's got, like she just outpowers him in some way, it looks ridiculous. I think everybody knows it at this point. There's a lot of complaints right now online about in The Witcher that they've got a sorceress character. I'm not familiar with The Witcher, so I'm going to get it all wrong. Yennefer, I think, is her name. She is fighting with a sword a lot.
I think that was from The Summer I Turned Pretty. I'm sorry, we're mixing up genres here, but go ahead, please. Yennefer, really?
Yennefer, okay. I think that. But apparently she's supposed to be a sorceress or a witch of some kind. She uses magic. But in the show, they've decided we need her to look tough, so we're going to have her using a sword. At a certain point, using a woman using a sword against big guys using a sword is just as magical as her just using magic powers. You can be intimidating with your magic ability as well. There's ways to write it to make it scary, and I'm sure that the writer of The Witcher knew what they were doing because it's got a huge following. People love the grimdark fantasy that they've produced. I don't know if it's a man or a woman. Yeah, I think that people are laughing at it more and more when they see it. I think the first time I saw it and I thought it was cool was Hit Girl in Kick-Ass. I don't remember if you remember that movie, but she comes in and she's doing martial arts and stuff and throwing knives and, using, it's not a bow staff, it's something else, but she's using tools that work for a small person against bigger people. And she's so much faster. She's kicking ass.
Yes, I'm sorry.
She's not
what a great piece of advice
physically.
you just gave for writers. Tools as well, right?
Yes.
Like what weapon makes sense for your character? Don't give your character a weapon that makes sense for a completely different character, right?
Yeah. Like, for example, the Yennefer character is what I'm being told is like, why would she use a sword when she's got magic power that is 10 times more effective and better? And that, to me, we had that problem in The Wheel of Time, where suddenly you had characters using swords and knives when it's like, why would you do that when you can fight somebody from like 50 feet away with the one power? It didn't make any sense. And, they're sitting there the villain was the one who was like, oh yeah, I have a sword. And she like makes an air sword. And she's like, it's super deadly and lightweight and fast. She's like, but it's not like nothing. Like I could defeat anybody, even if they're 5 feet taller than me and bigger than me with the one power. Like, this is nothing. Like, why would you fight with this when you can do that? And then nobody took that advice. It's like the villain pointed out that it's pointless to use anything other than the one power because it's so much better. But then none of the other female characters, it was almost, although, okay, so I was going to say, it's almost like the writers didn't know that monologue happened. And I'm like, they didn't know, because I don't know if in one of my more recent videos, I pointed out that Brandon Sanderson said that when they wrote the Wheel of Time show, he was brought in as an advisor, but they didn't
we
take
talked
any
about
advice.
this. About Sanderson's talking about the writer's room. Yeah,
how they were writing different scenes. He's like, none of the writers were really communicating with each other or keeping in touch with like what's happening. None of the scripts were done before they started filming. They would literally like, hey, we're filming at this location. If you have a scene that takes place there, I don't care if the rest of the episode you're writing isn't done, just bring that scene over. And sometimes they would be like, oh, quick, finish this scene and then bring it over. But yeah, so it doesn't sound like they listened to that monologue from season 2 that swords make no sense for the girls. And then you had an entire season of the women using knives and swords and whatnot. And I'm going, whatever.
I'd like to bring up a great, but let's talk about Sun Tzu for a moment.
Oh yeah, Art of War.
I mean, we're gonna expand to battles, but famously, Sun Tzu, or at least we think the manuscript of Sun Tzu says the greatest general is someone who can win without fighting.
Yes,
who can still win without fighting. And I want to talk about a scene that I thought was one of the greatest non-fight sequences in the history of cinema. And again, my age is showing here. 1942, Mrs. Miniver, starring Greer Garson. She wins the Academy Award for her performance as a British woman just as the war begins with Germany.
Okay.
I won't say too much here. She won the Academy Award for her performance, very deserved. I've had older relatives, and I've seen the story online. It may be apocryphal, that at the end of a couple of scenes in this movie, the movie audience was so impressed, they got up and gave her a standing ovation. This is a movie. This is not the Academy Award ceremony. The actual movie, they gave a standing ovation. And the scene I'm talking about is, and I'm not giving too much away for 80-year-old movie. She is a British housewife, for want of a better term. She's at home. Her children are asleep upstairs. She's alone. Her husband has actually gone with the fleet of small boats to rescue the British Army at Dunkirk. And a German plane has crashed, and the German pilot shows up in her house. This is her house in Britain. And he is a fanatical Nazi, willing to do anything to anyone. And he's been wounded. He's scared. He's angry, and this woman is confronting him. And at no point does she engage in combat. There is a knife. She's thinking about using the knife, but she talks him into surrendering.
Oh, nice. It's a psychological battle.
Yes. She convinces him that, what he's heard, that he's going to be treated badly, is wrong. The British are not going to mistreat, especially this early in the war. They're not going to mistreat, she psychologically manipulates him. And actually, I use the word manipulate, but like, it's for his own good to surrender. He's not going to escape to Germany from Yorkshire,
Yeah.
That doesn't, only movies does that happen. And the police come, and of course it's a country British policeman who comes along and says, well, you come along with me, young man, the war's over for you, or something like that. But it's very plausible. It's believable. I mean, I wouldn't recommend it. I mean, if I were in that situation, I would recommend, use the knife, but it actually works within the film. So I just, between Conan and Mrs. Miniver, there's a lot of choices you can make as a writer that can succeed. There's no one formula. In fact, if you think there's a formula, you're probably doing the wrong thing, right?
Yeah, for the formulas that are out there, and I say this in a video. Oh no, actually, I cut it out of this video. I'm in the process of editing a video, and I just cut that section out because it was too long. But I talked about how there's lots of videos that you're going to find online, books that you're going to find in bookstores about here is the format for story. You know, I wrote them all down, all the different formats for storytelling that exist. It's like endless. They should never be used as a like, oh, I'm going to start from scratch and I want to write a story. Let me get the hero's journey out. Okay, step one, you know, like, the world, this current setting, you know, what it is. And, you know, and then you go to the next step and you go, okay, now I have to make this happen. You're not going to succeed if you're writing stories like this. I think you need to let your creativity run a little bit wild. But if you get stuck, come back to formulas that people have come up with and see if maybe there's something that somebody else has noticed works in certain scenarios or in certain story types, and it has helped them. See if it helps you too. Think of them as guidelines for when you're lost, not necessarily guidelines for when you want to start something. But it's different for every person. But I genuinely think that you're going to get boring stories if you're constantly following a format that you're following a format that as like, that's how I'm going to tell the story. But it's the same thing with these fights, like what you're talking about. You know, not subverting expectations needs to be handled very carefully, because I like it when it happens, but you need to make it make sense. So in a fight, if you're seeing the big guy versus the little guy, we will have the expectation of the big guy is going to beat the little guy just on visuals alone. But if you've spent the entire film building up that the little guy is deadly, it means something completely different. Now, what you're talking about, Mrs. Miniver, where the fight does not happen, but she's thinking about it the whole time, that is building up to it and to something happening. But you also she's a wife and a mother, and her kids are asleep upstairs. So what's going to happen if she doesn't win? You know, the consequences are laid out pretty heavily there. So think about all the different options. I think you're right. That's good advice. And don't assume just because it seems like this is the easiest thing to do that it's always the best thing. Like Mrs. Miniver, I think, is a really good example of that, you know, well, you could just have her stab the guy. Well, you wouldn't have a story if she just stabs the guy, because then it's like, what? She stabbed him, no problem, the end. She's literally keeping him from doing something until the police arrive. And then when the police arrive, she needs to make sure that nothing happens when they get there, right? I'm sorry, I haven't seen the movie, but I'm assuming that's kind of how it goes, is that you're sort of wondering what's going to happen if something happens. And it could happen just on its own, the two of them being alone, or it could happen when somebody else arrives. So there, you build up that tension. I don't know.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, and you know, the other one, I guess we need to get to brawls and battles pretty soon, but the other one that's a great example of the fighting a battle without fighting the battle is back to The Hobbit. Bilbo does not take on the trolls. He outwits them. In a fist fight.
Right.
He gets them, you know, distracted. He knows their weakness is that they are dumb as stone. And he gets them distracted and chatting and thinking about what recipe they're going to use on him, and the sun comes.
The sun comes up. Yep.
Yeah.
No, that I think so. You've tied together now Alexander and then Mrs. Miniver, and then here we got the Hobbit. These are good examples of you know, building anticipation to a battle that does not happen. It can be very dangerous to have that goal in mind, that we're going to have it happen. We're going to anticipate that it's going to happen, but then it won't happen. And you need to make it make more sense that it doesn't happen than it does happen. Like how would it have made sense if Mrs. Miniver attacked the guy? He's a soldier and she's not. She would have had to figure out some way to 100% be able to kill him. I'm assuming she didn't have like a pistol in a drawer in the kitchen that she could be like, let me go get you some tea. She's got a bread knife. That's it. Your chances of taking him out with a bread knife are not good. Especially if he's keeping his eye on you all the time. and then, then you have to keep in mind what the other consequences are. If, okay, let's say that I don't kill him, he's just hanging out here. What happens when somebody comes along? Build up. It has to make the most sense, number one. And especially for your characters, like we talked about a woman taking out a big guy. This is essentially the same scenario. But how you build up to it that's what's going to sell that story as satisfying or not satisfying. You said that the audience cheered at the end. I'll bet it's because it felt like a pretty intense moment where she's got to figure out, how do I handle this situation? This guy is a ticking time bomb potentially if I don't defuse it so that things can remain peaceful and my family can be safe. So it was all about, I would bet, having not seen it, that it was about building up that tension and the stakes. Just to
yes, and gosh, you anticipated a last thing before we, I guess, if we want to move to brawls now,
yeah, we can.
Is stakes, right? I find a lot of fiction I read, people, the writer is assuming we understand the stakes and that we feel the stakes are important. I mean, they have a character, and I guess, writers love their own characters, but like, we haven't fallen in love with the character. We haven't identified with the character. We aren't empathetic with the character. And then suddenly they're in a situation and like, yeah, I mean, I'm thinking like, yeah, it would be too bad if this guy got killed, but who cares? I don't know enough about him to care whether, he or she is killed yet. So having stakes, it's clear what the stakes are, what your characters are worth to the audience. By the time this non-battle occurs in Mrs. Miniver or Alexander or The Hobbit, you are already deeply invested. Absolutely. Perfect word.
Yeah. So I think if you know that you're lacking in one thing, you can compensate a little bit with something else. So the no stakes thing, if the movies are the easiest place to figure this out. If you see a fight scene that is just amazing, it's so cool, like the choreography is great, it feels intense, you can be into it for that. But even in those scenarios, you kind of have to imply that there's something that you're rooting for. Maybe the main guy that you're supposed to be on their side is the only one in a room full of people, and they got to fight their way out, which I'm sure happened in John Wick. But it always means something more if you have some sort of a sympathy for this character. So for him, his dog, I know, got killed or something. And so he's like, anybody who has ever loved a pet is going to understand why he's doing what he's doing. The fight scenes will always mean more if you're correct, if we know what's at stake and it matters to us. But if you can't create that, you've got to do something else. Make the fight really clever. Make it so you're showing off something. That's when a fight scene, I think, is being used as a tool to reveal something. Let me think of. I can't think of any examples offhand. Maybe you'll be able to, but when you're using a fight scene to reveal something about a character, like this person doesn't fight clean, they fight dirty, and it's your protagonist, so when
we've got Raiders of the Lost Ark, right? We've got this character, Indiana Jones. He's the hero. Mm-hmm. We're rooting for him, and he's, adventuring down the street, and someone comes with a sword and is showing off how great they are with the sword, and he just shoots the guy and moves on.
Right. That would not have made, if that was the opening scene where we see a guy we know nothing about who runs by, but there's even still little visual cues that are telling us something. He looks physically exhausted in that street. Harrison Ford's character, which he was in reality, which is why he opted to shoot him. And then it became like, oh my gosh, instead of doing this fight scene, we're just going to have him shoot him because they were supposed to fight. Were you aware of that? There was supposed to be a big epic fight between Harrison Ford and that actor.
I thought he was supposed to use the whip to get the sword. I've heard different things, but I'll defer to your knowledge.
Okay, well, I don't know, one of them is true. Either way, it wasn't supposed to go
Both.
down the way it was.
It's Hollywood. They're both true. Yeah.
It wasn't supposed to go down the way that it was. Harrison Ford was exhausted, and at one point he either did it on camera where he just took out the gun and pretended to shoot, or he said, "Why don't I just shoot him? I have a pistol." And then they decided, "Oh my gosh, yes, this is what we'll do." But it went from what was supposed to be a battle to just that. There are visual cues to let us know that Harrison Ford is the guy we should be rooting for. The other guy's big and scary and refreshed, and he's got this sword. He obviously knows how to use it. And so there's that's like the tiniest little bit of like, you can sympathize with this character, and he might not win. And you might want him to win because I don't know. He's obviously the American in the foreign land. So, you root for the American if it's an American show. I really liked, what is it? The Tony Jaa movies. I'm so into martial arts movies. Tony Jaa is like a very small Thai boxer, like Thai fight, he does Thai boxing. And he did a bunch of movies, and I would go see them like again and again and again in theaters. But it's very brutal fighting with like elbows and knees, and like every hit, you're like, that's got to be like.
Yeah, there's a style there. There's a certain type of martial art there.
Yeah, Thai.
Yeah.
Muay Thai.
Sure.
Yeah. And you root for him from the start because he's small. I mean, even his voice is relatively high pitched. He seems like a little boy against like these, Goliaths.
Honor.
So, and there's an instinct in us to protect, we want the one who's smaller to not lose. I think this is not true with maybe every culture, but I think that it has become pretty widespread that a lot of people want to see the underdog win. But there's usually something that you can do to kind of implant sympathy. And then that's the first step to stakes, because then the stakes are, we want him to live. We don't want him to die. He'll die if they lose this fight. So there's all kinds of things that you need to do for your fight scenes to make them worth something other than just, this is a technically awesome fight. Because you can compensate with making fights awesome and technical, but there's only so much you can do before it's like, I mean, if I were to just take any movie clip fight and go, this is a fantastic fight, you should watch it, and you know nothing about the characters, and it literally starts from the first thrust or the first punch thrown, you'd probably just be like, I guess I'm watching the technicalities of it. You have no idea what the story is about unless they're very good visual storytellers with, the way that the fighters are fighting or, how they're visually represented. But it's not going to mean anything to you. If you get that tiny little bit of backstory, do whatever you possibly can to insert character into your fighting body, then that's going to help immensely with creating emotional resonance, with making it memorable for your audience or your reader. We've been talking for about an hour and 20 minutes we've been all over the place, but it's basically fights and fights within storytelling. We've talked a little bit about battles and brawls and duels, but there's definitely a lot that can be covered that we haven't gone over. And I want to talk more about specific fight scenes because I just enjoy them so much. So we can come back to discuss certain fight scenes and let the conversation go wherever it goes. But I think we'll go ahead and bring this little discussion to a bit of a close here. I think you said you wanted to look at more at Helm's Deep, and then also Seven Samurai. And what was the other one you mentioned? You mentioned
well,
another
we've
one
got a lot of choices in fantasy of famous battles, and I'd love to cover some of those. Yeah.
Definitely, I'm interested to see Last Samurai Standing because I love Battle Royale and I love Samurai, and that's basically what this looks like it is. So I'm here for it. There's so many fight scenes that we can discuss, and like, how do they work within the context of the story? What makes them memorable? Is it just the choreography? Is there something more to it? Is it the performances of the actors? Like, I love all this stuff. So we can talk about more of that. And I'd love to have you back on here for that if that's awesome.
You're challenging me to another duel. I accept.
Awesome. Let's do this. But let's call it quits for now. Dr. Perlmutter, do you have a way that you would like for people to reach out to you if they want to contact you?
They could probably look me up. I prefer scrolls sealed with wax delivered by magic owls, but
nice.
But email will do. Yeah. And
okay.
They can look it up.
Nice. I will put a link to your University, yes, in the description.
Web page. I'll send it to you. Thank you.
Okay, very cool. But for now, please like, subscribe, and comment, even if it's just with an emoji, or if you're feeling super generous, check out my Patreon, Ko-fi, or hit the money heart thanks button down below. In the meantime, happy storytelling.